Recording in progress.
Welcome everybody today. I'm Ellen Stager, President of the League of Women Voters of Richardson. This meeting is being held on April 26, 2025 in order to get some guidance for how to speak publicly at a meeting. For a little bit of background. I got an email from the North Central Texas Council of Governments on March 14th, 2025. It invited us to attend a meeting on March 27th in Irving to learn about Access North Texas and give some input. Now, I do realize that I think this was an email distributed to a lot of people, but it's the first time we had ever gotten one. Also, we are having more and more members joining the league right now, the Richardson League right now, and a lot of them are more interested in advocacy. And so I just felt like this was something that we probably should start doing, or at least check into. I said this was to learn about Access North Texas. Access North Texas is updated every 4 years. It documents the transportation needs of older adults, people with disabilities, individuals with lower incomes, and others who may be experiencing transportation related challenges. After I got the email, I emailed Shandu Garapati, who is the Richardson League's Director of Transportation at University of Texas at Dallas, UTD. I also emailed Kathy Lawrence, who is our off-board chair of active transportation, and Martha Doris, who is our off-board chair of CHIP, which is Children's Health and Insurance Program. I emailed them specifically as I thought they might have some good insights to share if we went to speak at this meeting, at the North Texas meeting. I then emailed the entire board asking for their input. What ensued was 12 days of emails going back and forth. We had everything from, we can't say anything because Richardson League's position on land use and urban design, section C, which is on transportation, does not cover all the points that Shandu wants to make at the North Central Texas Council of Governments meeting. We also had emails saying that we could attend the meeting and let Shandu speak. I was out of the country, so I could not attend myself. And our policy is that the president may appoint someone to speak on behalf of the league. Other ideas that were floated here was this meeting is informative. It's for information gathering. It is not a place to advocate. Other ideas were we should contact leagues in the area, possibly Denton, Tarrant, Dallas, and Collin, and issue a signed joint statement. The person thought this was a good chance for the league advocacy in a meaningful way. And it just turns out that currently there is a big issue in the area about funding for DART. And DART is Dallas Area Rapid Transit. So it's a real hot topic right now. The Richardson League has done very little advocacy in the past 15 years. Our focus has been on voter service. I have asked Elisabeth MacNamara to join us today and to guide us through how we could handle speaking publicly about issues in the future, so we don't have to have 12 days of emails going back and forth. Elisabeth is the past president of the National League of Women Voters. She's a current director on the Texas League and currently on the board with Collin County League. So Elisabeth, I send it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. And, you know, I'm always delighted to talk about program positions, advocacy, which I agree we don't probably do as much as we ought to have. And so you know, we can come back to the, you know, should you take advantage of opportunities like that? Could you take advantages of opportunities like that? Would you if you had more information later on? But excuse, my cat likes to attend meetings. But to begin with, I kind of like to go back to some basics because reading through the email string, everybody was identifying the right issues. You know, could we speak? Who could speak? you arrived at the correct conclusion, of course, that yes, Ellen can always designate somebody, and probably ought to, if this is an area that demands a certain amount of, a different kind of expertise than she has. And then, then what is the process for doing that? And so I want to focus today on program generally, positions, and process. All right, because we are an organization that can go one of two ways. We can either take a very narrow view of our authority at the various levels of league, and kind of get into a mother may I kind of a mindset. Do we have permission to do this? Are we allowed to do this? Or we can take the position that I was raised with in league. When I was a young league member in the 1980s, we had a wonderful member of my local league, Pat Parker, who had been a state league president somewhere. And she, of course, was our guru. And if you were at an annual meeting and you had any kind of a question about what can we do and what you can't, everybody turned to Pat. And Pat's response was always the same. Sounds like a good thing to do. There must be a league way of doing it. Okay, so I want to focus on how we find the league way, because yes, of course, you could have gone and talked. Probably you should have gone to talk just for no other reason than it's an opportunity to practice in a really low stress environment. Because again, they're talking about community input, and it kind of raises your profile a little bit. So there are a lot of considerations on the should you. So I'm going to share screen here. I have a really share. Ellen, can you
Yes,
turn?
let me make you a
Okay.
co-host. You're now.
I have a really unsexy thing here to put up. All right, let's share screen. Let's put that. No, that's not it. Hang on. Yes, it is it. Now, how do I make that? How do I make that work? Oh, that's how I make it work, right? Yeah, there we go. There we go. Okay. So as I said, this is really not sexy at all. But I need to refer to some things in the bylaws. These are going to be reflected in your bylaws too, because Irving just recently was thinking about pulling all of this out, but that cooler heads have prevailed. Anyway, program is defined in league as action to implement the principles. And the principles are something that I think every league member should be aware of. It's something we don't talk about enough, and we don't understand real well. But in the beginning, for the first 50 years or so, leagues were taking positions. We'll talk about what positions are in just a minute. At all levels of league, and particularly at the national level, and things were starting to really accumulate. There was just lists and lists and lists of things, and a lot of them were very basic kinds of things, like the right to vote, the importance of informed participation in government, that kind of thing, equal opportunity types of things that kind of set the stage or kind of defined, the way the league looks at the world and the way that the league looks at our democracy. And at some point in the middle of the last century, the National League pulled all of these basic positions together into one document that's called the Principles. You can find it at LWV.org. Just by looking at, on the league management side, if you look at impact on it, if you can pull up impact on issues or just search for principles, they'll come up. And as I said, they're very, very general concepts of government. And I think if everybody reads them, I don't think there's anybody on this call that would disagree with any of them. They're that broad. And program is defined as action to implement the principles. Now, if you've been in league a long time, and you've learned by rote, you may remember that we've thrown up a Chinese wall between advocacy and anything that was not advocacy, including development of program, voter service, and all of that. And I think to understand the term program, you need to understand how it was defined in those first 50 years or so. And the process that we have in the bylaws of taking input and then determining what we're going to do for the next couple of years evolved is based on good organizing principles. You have a federated organization, you're organized in all 50 states, you have state level leagues, you have local leagues, and you got to decide by some process, what are we going to work on for the next 2 years? So the term program, which was streamlined in the 70s to the point where now no one understands it, was originally program of work. And it was determined at the national level by a meeting before and after convention every other year of a council of state presidents, which is where our term council comes from. It was a way of aligning the organization behind a common goal, which is why it's good organizational principles. And so program, actually, if you think about it as a program of work, it's everything we do. Is voter service action to implement the principles? Well, if your principles are that every eligible citizen should have free and fair access to the polls, and that our democracy depends on the active and informed participation of citizens in government, then absolutely it's action to implement the principles. In a way, in a very small, low-level way, it's also advocacy. Because we're informing people, we're making sure they have the right information, we're arming them with the tools they need to make their own decision at the polls. And that's advocacy on an education on the most basic level. But of course, there are other things other than voter service that leagues do, which means that we take positions, we want to be able to speak to issues that are in the public interest. And the principles allow us to do that because they cover more than just everybody should get to vote and everybody should be informed and active. They cover a number of different areas. So action to implement the principles can also include other governmental issues that either we want to study because they're emerging issues, they're things that we haven't considered before, or that we want to take action on. And that's where positions come in. Positions are public policy statements that reflect our members' understanding and agreement to, either as to a solution to a problem or to a goal we want to achieve on a governmental issue. Okay. They are designed, we make these public policy statements for one reason and one reason only. And that is so we can speak with one voice, so we can have that multiplier effect of having an organization with thousands of members behind it, speaking to Congress or speaking to the state legislature, or in your case, you've got 50 folks that are speaking to local government, and that can increase the impact of all of our voices. So we collect those public policy statements so that we don't have to do some of the things that y'all were discussing. Do we need to pull together, some way? Do we need to look at something different, do a study, in other words, before we can speak from the position that we have on transportation? That's why we collect positions. And we want those position statements to, quite frankly, be as broad as possible so that they continue to have value in years to come. So it's not just the member understanding and agreement of the current membership, but other folks joining the league and who are supporting our principles can also look at these positions and say, yeah, I'm cool with that. We're fine. So if we're saying something in Austin, as we are these days, and to the legislature, when those legislators come back home or are hearing from their constituents, they're hearing the same message. they're hearing the same, they're getting the same facts, they're getting the same information from their members back, from their constituents back home, as our league representatives are telling them in the Capitol. And the same thing is true in Congress, and the same thing is true at the local level. You want folks, if you're talking to an local elected official, if they run into another league member and say, yeah, we heard this statement, we want to make sure that that member, A, knows we made the statement, and B, is going to back that up. It's one of the ways that we've got that our federated structure can be powerful. So I think one of the things that we all struggle with at the local level, because I look at positions at the national level and they're very broad. They're basically organizational, they're kind of principles in the area that we can use, very broad stroke kinds of things. You get down to the state level, and our state positions drive me crazy because we've got this wonderful broad statement that can be interpreted to apply to new and different situations. And then we have a laundry list of things that came out during our study and consensus process that can make it look like there are limitations. And by the time you get to the local level, I know we've been doing this in Collin County out here. We've got, we're reviewing positions from the 70s that are referring specifically to things that don't exist anymore. So, we may want to consider whether or not we want local positions even that use the term DART. Is it always going to be DART? Who knows? Anyway, so the goal of this, if we remember that the goal of having a position is to speak with one voice and to be able to do exactly what you were wanting to do and talking about doing in this particular situation, take advantage of opportunities to inform our elected or appointed officials and maybe influence policy in some way, which is in fact advocacy, then we don't have to cobble together a new statement, or we don't have to cobble together, you have to put together a new statement, but we don't have to then test the waters as to whether our members understand and agree to absolutely everything we're putting in that statement. In other words, it allows us to be nimble. So when we're down at the Capitol these days, and an issue chair identifies a bill that we should testify on, that does not come back to what that issue chair says in their testimony doesn't come back to the board. The state board doesn't approve all of the testimony that we're giving in the legislature or all of the action alerts. That responsibility has been delegated to me and to Joyce LeBombard as the president, because ultimately we're speaking, this is her authority, this is her voice that we're applying. And we have to have a process like that, because if we had to wait for a board meeting or we had to convene an emergency board meeting, we'd never testify. You get 48 hours notice if you're lucky. And so we need positions that folks like issue chairs can apply easily to the emerging situations that we see every 2 years in the state legislature. So if you look at it like that, then I'm hoping, and please, if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate. This is completely designed to be able to allow you to avoid the situation that you were in, which was complicated, of course, by the fact that Ellen was out of the country, and there sometimes situations just can't be helped. So that's what positions are. That's where they come from. We develop them through a study and consensus process that can take as little or as much time as necessary in order to figure out, you've got 50 members. We gather information pro and con on an issue. We present that to the membership. We develop some discussion questions. And as a matter of fact, if y'all have done, I'm assuming that y'all have done did the judiciary study, the national judiciary study. No? Okay. Well, if you did, even if you didn't do it, you may just want to go on to the national website and look at the materials, because that'll give you an idea of what the process is. Preferably everybody meets at one time so that you can discuss those questions. And from the answers to those questions, From the consensus position, it's not a vote. It's you get a sense of the group, you send that back into whatever part of the organization is studying the issue, and they see whether or not we have member understanding and agreement. On the judiciary study, the questions were pretty big and broad, and they were kind of gimmies. But one or two, from everything I'm hearing, at least around here in Texas, hung some people up. And so what I have found over many, 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 many years of doing studies with League is the results are almost always not what you expect when you're going in. And that's a good thing. It means that we really are getting a sense of the group. So let's talk a little bit more about process. We are a federated organization. We're trying to speak with one voice to Congress, to state legislatures, and to local government. We're organized in the same way, but our members, of course, are all in communities, as are voters. So we need to have some guardrails around who's talking to whom, not because we want to, because we want to be difficult, but because we want to make sure that we're as effective as possible. So as an example, and this is a real example, if the California League is talking to their members of Congress in line with the League position that says no offshore, to oppose offshore drilling, right? We don't want the Louisiana League, in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, talking to their members of Congress saying, hey, we need offshore drilling to revive this economy. And this stuff does actually happen. The same thing is true. The legislature is in session. I am constantly having to deal with local leagues that, particularly some of the larger local leagues that really want to get in there and do their own advocacy and do their own thing, and kind of not, and they're doing this in line with positions. That's fine, but sometimes we don't know what they're saying to their representatives, and that's the kind of issue that comes up, and why we have to have some guardrails. I call this staying in your lane. Okay, if you're a local league, you talk to local officials. That does not include your local congressional representative. It does not include your local state reps. It means the folks that are only elected in the city of Richardson to do city of Richardson business. As long as you're talking to your level of government, and I would put this situation, this regional thing, as being local because it's regional, you have a lot of authority as a board to interpret your own positions, and you also have the ability to use national and state positions. And the state does have a transportation position, and if you ignore all of the laundry list of items underneath it and just look at the statement, you can interpret that, and it is you have the authority to interpret a state or national position. That national doesn't have a transportation position, but they have a lot of others, yourselves, and decide, does this language to us support what it is that we want to be able to say? And that is something that a lot of leagues don't realize. And let me give you an example. We have a position at the national level on equal opportunity, and that goes into wages and equal pay and things like that. When the study was done, the minimum wage, living wage issue came up as part of the questions, and we had staff members that went back that far. And if you called and said, look, we've got a proposal, local referendum, totally local, only going to affect, for example, the city of Richardson, to, within our boundaries, raise the minimum wage. And you called national to say, do we have permission to do it? They would say no. If you didn't call national and you looked at the language of the position, you'd say, absolutely, we're allowed to do this. And what I'm telling you is, as long as you're talking to local elected officials on an issue that affects only the city of Richardson, you don't have to call national, you don't have to call the state. You read that position and decide, does the language of this position apply to the situation that we have here?
Can I ask a question, Elizabeth?
Sure.
So applying that to our specific case here,
Mm-hmm.
you have seen our local position on transportation. Is that enough to have spoken at the North Central Texas Council of Governments? And
it depends on how, yeah, y'all were interpreting it, I think, pretty narrowly, because again, you too have a little bit of a laundry list.
yes.
If you take a broader view or use the state position, because I looked at the testimony that Shandu gave, and it was great. On behalf of the committee at UTD, it was focused on making streamlining. It was focused on making this as seamless and as user friendly as possible. And the state position says we want efficient, effective public transportation. It's in the broader statement. I think streamlining it, I think it's perfectly reasonable to interpret that position as saying, well, if that means that you get all of the bells and whistles that you get with an Uber, where you can see where the bus is and you can see, and it's easy to pay and it's easy to do, that makes the whole system more efficient. Okay, but that's up to you. So it was, yeah.
So every time that an opportunity comes up like this to speak to someone, would we have to get together as a board to decide how we would interpret what we need to say at that particular time?
I would say no. I would say that what you want to do is that this should be, you have a transportation. Sounds like you all have a little transportation committee, right?
We
You've
have
got some members.
well, we have active transportation, which is basically bicycles and walking and that type of thing. And then Shandu is with UTD. Shandu, you can, and Kathy and Shandu can answer themselves. Shandu is with the Comets for
Better Transit. We're a UTD student organization. We focus on transit advocacy mainly.
And Shandu is a senior this year, and she's graduating to go to med school next year. Congratulations. So I don't know that we will have someone next year to fill that position. So I was trying to kind of use her expertise in this also, since we had it here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, honestly, Ellen, you're the official spokesperson for the league. If you look at the position and you think, and you look at what it is that is being proposed as a statement, if you think you can interpret the position, then I think you can approve that. I think you can approve that directly. I don't think you need the whole board to be involved. If you have a question, then my first step would be to consult your executive committee to make it, get as small a group as possible, just for the sake of efficiency, not because we're trying to put hold the whole board out. If you do have a question, and I've had questions on some of the crazy things that the legislature is thinking about doing, can we stretch a particular position this far? Then yeah, it should be a board. It should be a board discussion. I think the stuff that we're talking about, that we're talking about here, biking and hiking. But again, you don't have to. You're not limited to your position. If you think your position is too narrow, your next step should be, what's the state position? And the state position is on the website. It's an advocacy and issues. I found the easiest way to find it is to go to the league management button and drop down to, believe it or not, publications. The state league website leaves a lot to be desired. But anyway, and under that button, there is an advocacy button, and it's right there. Fortunately, we have finally gotten that PDF hyperlinked, so you can go through the table of contents and hit on transportation. And that would be your next step. If you think your position is too narrow, and a lot of local leagues have very, very specific positions, which I absolutely advise against.
I'm
Then go
looking
to the
at ours
state
right
position.
now, and our fourth thing is participation of Richardson in the Dallas area rapid transit. And you've already said that's probably too narrow. We should just say regional public transit.
Yeah, regional, exactly, regional public transportation system. Yeah, just so that, but DART at least is something that people are going to have, memory of. I mean, some of the things that we found in the Collin County positions were just like, what on earth? What was that? Why did he so? And honestly, Collin County has been going through and cleaning up some of those things and defaulting to the broader principles in the position and getting rid of all of the specifics. And I am going to give you absolute permission to do that if you want to with your board. Get a subcommittee, have them look at there and see. Can we draw from the information in this position? Can we draw can we find a commonality that would constitute a position and allow us? Because if you're supporting, participation in DART, then you're supporting public transportation, right?
And number 5 says funding of DART, again, DART, by general use and sales tax up to 1%. Now that is very specific, but apparently that was considered, and that should probably stay in because.
Okay, so on positions, you can't, at annual meeting, you can edit these things, right? If you think we no longer have member understanding and agreement as to supporting, we have member understanding and agreement on public transportation, because I think you can refer back to the state position, but maybe not necessarily on funding DART by only 1%. Drop that part. Keep the public transportation and stay flexible, because you can decide at any given in any given situation, because no legislation is perfect. We always have to decide, on the whole, can we support this? You put something really specific into a position, and miracle of miracles, somebody, the Richardson City Council and Dallas and everybody else gets together and say, hey, we need to put more money into this. We're going to go to 2%. You don't want the league saying we can't support more funding for public transportation, which is an absolute good that we believe in, because we're limited to 1%. Do you see what I'm saying? So get rid of the 1%, right? It doesn't have to be in there. So, okay, I've got a question.
Jean has her hand up, or had her hand up first. Number 2 says consideration of social, environmental, aesthetic, and human values. To me, what they wanted us to speak about falls under that. Is that broad enough?
Yes, okay. I think that's perfectly reasonable. That is perfectly reasonable.
Okay.
I see this with leagues all the time, that what they want is, because again, if you look at this from a permission point of view, if you look at it as a mother may I, then what you're looking for is, I want to find a position statement that says that on March 24th of 2025, Ellen Steger can say this to the North Texas regional, government, and that doesn't work. You can never do that. You want to be able to have something flexible enough to say, I think this reflects human values. I think this is efficient. I believe this falls under this. And if you have any, when in danger, dread, or doubt, put your interpretation, send your interpretation to the board if you feel more comfortable doing that. And then ask for a really quick turnaround. Because but having your interpretation in there, it would, because you're the spokesperson, would probably help the decision-making process.
I have been trying very hard in the last year or two to involve more people in more things. Hopefully that someone will one day want to be president.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. As I said, if you're in doubt, then for heaven's sakes, yes, canvass your board.
I felt that I could go and say something. I felt like this was just an information thing and it was not advocacy.
Absolutely.
But I wanted other people to give me input so that I wasn't limited to just my thinking. And then that's when we got going all this. So
Right.
anyway.
Yeah, and this was the perfect, and listen, if you're going to stick your toe in the water, this was the perfect place to do it because the stakes were pretty low. I mean, it was information gathering. And so you haven't missed, the crucial opportunity to go and influence something that, for example, the Richardson City Council was considering. And having a process, discussing with your board a process, who do we think should be involved? Who should we involve? So that, because believe me, well, actually, right now I am looking at testimony by myself, but I'm doing it in conjunction with an issue chair that is more focused on the issue than I am. And that we have found that has been plenty to talk to the state legislature. Okay. I see Keith has his hand up. Is
Jean
at the
had
top
hers
of
up first, just as a,
Okay.
so
Okay.
Jean, you want to go first? And then we'll do Keith.
Okay. First, a couple of points. As I had said in one of the emails, I agreed with the things that Shandu was proposing as an individual. I mean, I individually agreed with her. I thought they were good ideas, but I did not see that they were necessarily covered by our position. And there had been no further discussion about it. And I know that a lot of these things didn't even exist at the time that we did the study, so they weren't contemplated specifically by the study. So hypothetically, if an issue chair is kind of out there on whatever their issue is, as opposed to the other members of the local league, and the president is also a little out there, are you saying that two people can decide for the league with the big, broad position to go and advocate on behalf of all the other members, something that most of those members don't agree with, because there's no other step in the process than to have a big, broad position and have two people make their decision as to what that means?
Okay. It's a good question. It's an excellent question, because you're putting your finger on what is kind of a sticky issue, which is that a lot of our positions have been around for a very long time. And this gets back to can local leagues support a minimum wage increase? And that's exactly the situation we were getting into, is that we had folks on staff who had been part of the study that we did, decades earlier. And because they knew that the study had not come to consensus on a question of minimum wage, if you asked permission, they were cutting that off. Here's the problem. Neither one of those staff members are with the league anymore. So what happens now? Moving forward, the new staff is going to look at this, if you ask permission, is going to look at this differently. And two of us that had been around for the study, Chris Carson and I, disagreed entirely with staff. And I was president, so I won. But again, the issue is not, and it wasn't a big out there thing. It was just at the time, a lot of cities were raising their minimum wage. A lot of leagues wanted to speak to this, and looking at the wording of the position, we couldn't see any reason why they couldn't, other than this historical memory about what the original consensus looked like. So it is tough if you know what the study was really all about, and if you remember the questions and you think, no, it really didn't cover that, that's tough. But again, is it a good thing to do? What's the league way to do that? And I think it's up to the board. The board knows that I'm the advocacy chair, right? That's my role on the board. They know that I'm consulting with the president on these things. They know we have issue chairs who are issue experts, or at least issue enthusiasts. And so to a certain extent, it's a question of trust. And, if we have a process that involves going back to and canvassing the membership every time a new situation comes up, that's not workable either.
No, I can see that, but I also can see if I were an issue chair for Dart and I suddenly decided that the issue that the position envisioned giving free Dart passes to everybody whose income was under a certain amount. To me, that's a very out there idea that isn't really contemplated by any of the positions as a specific item. But you could say, well, it's a good thing.
It is,
and so let's do it. And is that the kind of advocacy we do? That somebody has an idea and we run with it because they think it's a good thing?
No, no. Because to a certain, no, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because we're responding. We're not initiating this. We're not deciding that people should have free passes. Who gets to decide that? Whoever decides DART policy. And the legislature gets involved, city councils get involved. So we're largely responding to proposals that they have. So let's say, for example, in your hypothetical, that whoever decides, whoever the gods of DART ticketing decide that they want to give free passes, that they have the budget, they have the funding to give free passes to people under a certain income level. Are I think, knowing the league as I know it, we'd support that.
But we wouldn't go in and ask them to initiate that under the current.
No, usually because we don't, because that's usually not our role. There are other groups that are more attuned to transportation issues than we are, right? Our core mission is not improving transportation. Our core mission is making sure that voters have an opportunity to have their voices heard. So they're electing people that think of things like, let's have free DART tickets under it. That's our core mission. But if the opportunity arose, or if the opportunity, we're going to have a hearing on this. We'd like to hear what the League of Women Voters thinks about this idea. Do you really think your members would have a problem with your going in?
I don't know.
Because
I was trying to come up with an out there idea that our members might have a problem with.
No, it's a good example. It's a good example, Jean, because it's realistic. I mean, that's something that actually could happen. And so it is a good example. The other thing, of course, too, to this point is, why are we limited to the transportation position? We have other positions, including we have positions that support affordable housing, affordable this, affordable that, equal opportunity. Our equal opportunity position at the national level is pretty darn broad. So is this going to be a benefit? I mean, it may not be the transportation position you're looking at. It may be a different position that would allow us to support low income folks. And
maybe one of the questions about advocacy is it supposed to be responsive to what government is doing, or is it supposed to be asking government to do something?
It can be both. I'm just going to tell you as a practical matter, given our numbers, it tends at this point in time, it tends to be more reactive than we would like.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't mean, we've got a lot of work to do. And if you were to do a whole campaign around let's make DART more affordable, you could do that. Absolutely, you could do that. You could find partners. You could come up with a series of proposals. And if you were to do that, I would recommend using a combination of positions, right? Getting an overall sense, again, going back to those principles of where the league is just generally. And remembering where we came from. Out of the suffrage movement, women did not have the kind of women's issues included things like protecting women in the workplace. It included things like making things more accessible for women and children. All those things militate towards if there's the budget for, if we can allocate money for things other than, if we can stop allocating money for something else, this is a good place to put our money, then yes, I think we could. We just may not be able to do it from your transportation position. And you may want to do an educational forum, pro and con, to get a sense of where your members are. Because it'd be a campaign, right? But if you're responding quickly, like you were in this situation, and like we do in the legislature, then we've got to be able to react without having to convene a larger group of people. We just have to do that. Everything's situational.
Does that answer your question, Jean?
I think so. Ellen probably knows I've been doing this for about 30 years, and I have always been suspicious of the program aspects of the league. I think in a lot of instances, it comes off as a bunch of dilettantes who do not have expertise, taking what are essentially opinions and turning them into positions and advocating on them, which is why I've stayed kind of in the voter service lane. But that's not what we're talking about here, but kind of underlies my suspicions.
And Jean, Jean, it is absolutely fair comment. It is absolutely fair comment, because in a lot of ways, and I love local leagues, but I've looked, when you start looking at local league positions, or even, all right, confessions of a dilettante. I cannot tell you how many useless positions are in the Georgia League's position statements, because I thought it would be a good idea to do a study. I was young, they wanted to encourage me, and so they let me do the study. Positions we are never going to use, we're never going to look at again, and it happens all over leagues. So I hear what you're saying, which is, why you need to have advocacy priorities. If you're going to really get into this, you need to start having some priorities, and the board has to set those. The whole board has to set those.
Okay. I feel like you're saying that if we do make a public statement, it doesn't have to be a big, huge advocacy push that we're going to push for a lot of things. And we're going to get to you yet, Keith. Kathy Lawrence has something in the chat for this. Says, for statements we want to make publicly and there is no time to consult the entire board, could the statements be less specific limits, like not including numbers, percentages, etc.? So make it a broader statement.
If you're going to make a statement, at least in my experience, if the league is making a statement, we are generally making a statement in reaction to something, right? In which case, what we're reacting to is going to dictate what that statement looks like. Okay, we're making, as an example, we didn't participate. We didn't do this, but there was a press conference just recently in Austin with a lot of our partner organizations involving SB 16 and HB 5337, documentary proof of citizenship bills. Everything we're going to say, there is not a lot of data in this area, right? We've got very, very, very little data. What data we do have, however, indicates that this is a completely useless act that they're doing, other than to, just create messaging and to create another huge barrier for voters. Can we tell you how many senior citizens might be affected? Can we tell you how many low income, how many young people would be affected? No, that is not going to stop us, however, from making the point that these groups are more likely than not going to be disproportionately impacted because of various factors, right? And the statement is more powerful if we can show what the impact is going to be. There's no point in making a big general statement about documentary proof of citizenship, even though it's true, is unnecessary without being able to say, things like non-citizens voting or even attempting to register to vote is a vanishingly rare phenomenon. Young people, this is going to really hurt people who move a lot, or people who have transportation difficulties getting to the DPS, or who don't have access to their birth certificates, blah 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 blah. Okay, it's much. So you got to look at the situation and then decide what statement does the Richardson League want to make. And quite frankly, it's a matter of your comfort, where your comfort level is, how many folks you want to get involved with that. There's nothing wrong with canvassing your board, and you got good comments and you got good discussion going with all of that, right? And you had the time. If you were on a shorter timeline, then you may want to talk. You might want to talk, for example, to Jean, because she's more of a skeptic on league program, and it's always good to have a different point of view into all of these things. You might want to talk to people like Shandu, who have actual facts that they can use and have more information that they can give you. That's up to you. You're the president. You're the spokesperson. You can, and believe me, if you make a mistake, your board's going to let you know. I've made a few mistakes.
I'll say we vote every year, so.
And my board has let me know. So again, this is a lot of this is a judgment call. All I want to do is make sure that you understand that there are, while there are guardrails, there's a lot of flexibility within those guardrails. And again, if it's a good thing to do and you feel like your members support it, and I've yet to see, I've gotten into situations where we've upset members, but not because they disagreed with the position we were taking. They disagreed with how we were saying it, or the method that we were, how the statement was made, not whether it was made, and not the ultimate goal of the statement. We ran ads 15 years ago that specifically mentioned Claire McCaskill and Scott Brown in an effort to get some clean air legislation through. And there was nothing wrong. They were elected officials. We were not in an election year. And people they agreed with every word we said, and they were scandalized that we would mention names. So things like that happen. I'm still proud of those ads.
Elizabeth, Susan Major says, how does all this open up to working in coalitions?
Good question. Really, really good question. First off, in working in coalitions, if you're working on a particular issue, it's always much better to be working in coalition. And to the extent that you can, you're working with like-minded organizations, because remember, you have a lot of flexibility as a board in terms of interpreting your own positions and state and national positions that you are applying at your level of government. But you can't speak against, right? You can't say, oh, we're going to interpret the equal opportunity position as saying there can never be a minimum wage. That we can't do. We might not be able to say it's okay to raise it or whatever, but you can't go against a league position. Then you just have to remain silent. We got a lot of people, I don't agree with all the positions in the league that the league has. But in terms of, and now I've completely lost my train of thought. Totally. But, in terms of working with a coalition, you may not, you got to look for somebody that's pretty much like-minded, right? And there may be some things, it depends on what work you're doing with the coalition, and it depends on what you're talking about in terms of a coalition, okay? I have not seen that we're working in many coalitions anywhere in Texas, because a coalition is going to have, a real coalition is going to have agreements. There are going to be some responsibility. Everybody's going to have designated responsibilities. What I see us doing much more so is we're in information sharing spaces. where we're convening a group. Maybe we're even, we're deciding as a group, as a table of individual organizations that we all can support or oppose, for example, the same piece of legislation. We are deciding whether or not we might decide, there might be a subcommittee, there is, for example, on documentary proof of citizenship, that is putting together a little, action scenario. I don't agree with, honestly, as a league member, I don't agree with all of the things, all of the facts that they're putting out there, because I don't think, but we're still going to participate in the general principle of stopping SB 16 if we possibly can. Even if I think that some of the claims that are being made by some of our partner organizations may be a little dodgy, okay? Nevertheless, we all agree that this needs to be stopped. So if we're speaking on behalf of the league, I'm not including, if I'm sending out an action alert on this, I'm not including the stuff that I don't think is necessarily entirely true. I'm sticking with the things that I do know are true when I'm writing all of that up, okay? But it always gets complicated when you're in a coalition, and at some point you may have to decide that this is actually going further than, I find lately that it's been hard to get further out than where some of our members are. And within the parameters of what's actually doable in Texas, it's hard to find a place where our members are unwilling to go. As I said, in terms of what's reasonable.
Keith, you had your hand up earlier and it's down now, but.
Yeah, I just would put it. We spent 50 minutes talking about the president and the board. And we have a vice president of program and advocacy who seems to have been missed the whole role as part of this. It seems to me like that's that job's responsibility to know the state positions or find the state positions, to understand the local positions, to understand where the members are, that we do the LPP surveys, to understand what members you might need to talk to or be worried about it, or what your positions cover and where you go so far. And that role needs to kind of be, initiate and be in the middle of all of this and advising the president. The president doesn't have to do all of this stuff.
Right.
If the VP is doing all of that work ahead of time, that you're just getting an advisor from that. And
yeah,
I think you have the authority between the two of you to make the decisions. And if it's questionable a little bit, then you might want to go to the board. You figure out when you need more information or what the framework is. Then I allow I allow the responsibility of that position to do the right thing rather than having the board try to judge, and be in the middle of all of it. I don't think that's the board's responsibility for the most part. And I guess that's my comment. And I'll let Elisabeth comment on that, but I think we've missed a whole position as we've talked about all of this.
Well, and that's absolutely, exactly. Again, all leagues are structured differently. I'm not a big fan of assigning role. I am really not a fan of assigning roles in bylaws. We just pulled all of that out of the Collin County bylaws. If you want to have a vice president for program, one of the vice presidents wants to do program or will do program, fine, that's great. But assigning that role in the bylaws ends up in a lot of times in situations where the poor person who's got that assignment doesn't know what to do or hasn't got, so you got to be, that's a question, that's an internal board thing that y'all decide. But absolutely, that's one of the reasons why we want somebody in these positions. And I get the sense that, for other than your bylaws may say you have to have a program vice president, that y'all have been mainly focused on voter service, which is something I encourage because you do it well. If you want to move into this other, then that's a discussion the board does need to have in terms of, and then the nominating committee needs to have in terms of recruiting somebody who's going to do program the way you're thinking of it, as opposed to the way most people most normal human beings hear the word program. Who's going to come and speak at our general meeting this month? Which I'm going to say is, yes, part of our program of work. Of course it is, because we do educational forums. They're incredibly valuable, but so often that, and this is true in Collin County, whoever the program vice chair is, vice president or chair or whoever is, that's their principal responsibility. It's not advocacy. It's finding a speaker for the next, it's planning how many meetings do we want to have and who's going to be the speaker. And that's a big job. So if you want to get more out there, publicly, then, you might want to think about talking to the nominating committee, which of course it's too late at this point, about that, or talking to the board, who among you would like to be let's pick an issue. I'm big on so don't try and do everything everywhere all at once. It doesn't work. But if there's an issue, particular issue, and DART may be, because yes, indeed, Matt Shaheen from Collin County is taking pot shots. I didn't even know about that until yesterday. So trying to, because we're paying our 1% sales tax and it's all going to Dallas, the feelings. So yeah, I mean, that's becoming an issue. Part of you is in Collin County. So if that's something that y'all particularly want to get involved in, the legislature will be gone, thank God, in about a month. So, but there are other things, and matter of fact, we were talking about this. Last night. Water has become a huge issue. And one of the things that we are anticipating coming out of this legislature is going to be a constitutional amendment providing for, dedicated funding for the water board, the water trust, whatever it is that, whatever it's called, that is responsible, and some legislation that is going to start directing where some of those funds are going to go. If there's going to be a constitutional amendment in the fall, one thing the State League is talking about is, can we do an education campaign? And we have to see what the amendment looks like. Can we support the amendment? And then could we do an educational campaign around it over the summer and into the fall? Because believe it or not, we are allowed to take positions on issues, even if we're doing a lovely pro and con voter guide. We haven't been recently, because so many of the things that are going up on the Constitution are such hot topics, and so culture worry, that we tend to stay out of that to protect our voter service. But this is an issue where we're finding that conservative legislatures are going, wait a minute, the league is interested in water? You have positions on water? So I mean, it actually could be a really interesting thing, and that's something you might want to talk about at annual meeting. Would that be something that someone would be willing to help you come on the board, or some board member would be willing to plug into, particularly since if this works out, the materials will be coming from the State League. Just again, something to think about. So a way of, forgive the pun intended, sticking your toe in the water, in a way that isn't going to get so controversial that
that is one thing I think the Richardson League has done really well, especially in the past few years. We do have in our bylaws that we will have 4 vice presidents. Look at that issue. But when we find someone who is interested in a topic, they can become we have job descriptions. And if we find somebody who is interested in a topic, we will make a job description and say, you are now this person. And that's how we got Shandu with the transportation at UTD. That's how we got Kathy Lawrence with active transportation. So if we know and that's how we now have 14 people on the board. When I first started, not quite that that big on the board.
No, I think it's wonderful. I really think it's wonderful, and the transportation is an area that you really do want to focus on, and it's a good area. It's a really, really good area, because I mean, I read your testimony, and I thought, oh my gosh, that all of that makes so much sense. And yes, DART is very slow. All bus services in this part of the country are very slow.
Elizabeth, there is one thing in the chat too. Do you have the chat up?
Oh,
I quit sharing your.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
I didn't know I had that power, but I do. It says it seems that only a president approval and within the league's positions, public statements can be made to address the current situation, but perhaps should not be so specific as to raise controversy within one's own league.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. You do not want to you do not want to get out over your members' skis. That is for sure. I have just found that these days, it is really hard to do that with anything that has a reasonable possibility of, of getting legs and going someplace. I would absolutely stay out of the culture wars. It's a lot of these decisions, a lot of stuff that has been going on. We've got a lot of folks around the state, local leagues that have got way passionate over the last few years about what's going on with school libraries. We were flinging around, which I don't like either, but we were flinging around words like book banning and all kinds of things. And that isn't what was happening. From a league point of view, what was happening was that school boards, nobody, there's been no list of books, no law that has been passed that says you must take these books out. School boards have been surrendering. It's the outside pressure, which to me, if you start again, there's a league way. What is the actual problem here? Is the problem, yes, the books are being taken off the shelves. Is that because there's actual de jure censorship, or is it because not enough people are showing up on the other side of the issue to school board meetings to show their support for the board in not taking these books off, right? Is this a civic participation problem, or is this an actual censorship problem? We're good at that. We are really good at threading that kind of needle and pulling this into a larger discussion than and a more in a lot of ways a more principled discussion. These school boards are getting bullied. This is not how this is supposed to work. And a lot of times you'll find that there's a lot more support for that kind of statement than there is for going with whatever is the latest clickbait. It's harder to do, it's harder to get attention, but it is something to start thinking about, that we don't always have to immediately go. We don't immediately have to go study libraries because we don't have a position on school libraries, right? We can look at what's actually happening and make a statement based on positions that well-established positions that our members agree with, that this is no way to govern. A handful of loud people from outside the state Googling the books in your life, phrases in books and compiling a list is not good government, right? And so again, there are all sorts of different ways of looking at how you can get involved without and stay very, very league-like. Because remember, we can say issues are not partisan till we're blue in the face, but depending on the approach you take to them, it's very difficult to maintain that in this environment. Really, really difficult. So if you're going to go to the wall on something, make sure you're going on to the wall on something that really, really, really matters, like voting rights. Where are, polling place locations? I mean, on the ground, we disenfranchise a lot of people just based on where the county, the county commissions, what the plan is, what plan is approved for where polling places are going to be. Not a huge issue with Dallas County or Collin County because they've got really good election administrators, but that, in Tarrant, that was a huge issue. And thanks to student groups in the league, They defeated that by showing up at a commissioner's court meeting and just fill in the room.
Wow.
So things can be done at the local level. It's just, somebody's got to be paying attention. So maybe if you want to get into this, maybe where you want to start is just seeing if people can observe the city council.
Excellent.
See
Does
what they're up to.
anybody else have a question for Elisabeth while we've got her? Elisabeth, thank you so very much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Shani, did you have a question?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I
Oh,
did.
sorry.
I know we spoke a lot about leading up to advocacy, but I wanted to kind of ask about after advocacy. How is it best to give the information that we're doing that advocacy to the league members and to the public? Because I think this is something that is very cool for somebody in our age group. Like, oh, people are doing stuff. That is something that definitely speaks to the imagination of young people. So what sort of communication methods, I'm wondering, social media, obviously, and things like that, but, how do we go about after we've done the advocacy, or like
Right.
while we're doing the advocacy, how do we show people inside and outside the league what's going on to potentially get people interested?
Right. Yeah, excellent question. And you can do a number of things if you're actually looking at something. Say, you're observing something in you got an observer watching the city council, and they come up with something that is really going to be bad, or is really going to be good, one way or the other. You either want to support or oppose it. Now you've got something specific that you're responding to, and you've got a built-in activity that you can give to folks that are also interested in that issue. You can issue an action alert. You can put together a social media post. You could send things out to your members. Look at this either good or bad thing that the city council is doing. Here's the league position on it. Here's some suggested language. We'd ask you to please call your city council person. And in Richardson, as in every place else, it'll be all the city council people, since they're all elected at large, and tell them and deliver this message. If you issue an action alert, everybody is speaking for themselves. They're not speaking for the league. But if they're carrying the league message that this is bad, or we oppose this, and here's why we oppose it, why it should be opposed or it should be supported, then that's something that I guarantee you the city council is not accustomed to. They're used to doing things because there's administering the city, and that in and of itself is extremely opaque. The other thing, of course, too, within the city of Richardson that you can also do is, consider doing some. I've seen the league in Knoxville, Tennessee did this many years ago, particularly with a young member who was interested in doing this. Going in and saying, and just, really neutral, we'd like to know what the city manager does. We'd like to put a piece up on our website about what the city manager does. Would you be willing to do a quick little video with us describing your job? Again, not for or against, but we just want to educate the public. And a lot of times folks really want to do that because they're wondering where the public is. They don't know how to get out to the public. So, you can start with just educational pieces so people better understand, all that stuff that we put in the voter guide. This is what this office does. Okay. Well, with city government, there are so many people, there are so many employees, so many appointed people that do a lot of this work. How, kind of, for those of you like Jane and I that go back a really, really long way and remember the Know Your County and Know Your City projects that New Leagues had to do, it's kind of in that vein. But there's so many better tools that we can use now. So yeah, but an action alert, they issued an action alert in Tarrant County to have people show up at Commissioner's Court, and it worked. So there's no reason why you can't do that locally.
To follow up with what Shandu was asking, if she goes and speaks before DART, for instance, or not DART, the North Central Texas Council of Governments on DART, would it be appropriate to follow something like that up with, say, a Facebook post saying one of our members went and spoke and advocated for XYZ, or?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. That's great content for social media.
Or for somebody to, or link to a video and say, you know, look at minute 18.42 or something, and, you know, for great commentary by one of our members or something.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's a great idea. Yeah, anything like that. You can always promote, if you make a statement, make sure people know about it. Okay. Make sure that you get it out there. And social media still is probably the best way. Because you're in a big area, and the Dallas Morning News isn't going to be that interested. But there are local papers too that need content. So local outlets. But so anyhow, yeah. Absolutely, all of the above. Make sure that you let people know you're doing things.
That might give us some content for our Instagram. We don't know yet exactly how to do that. We need some more young people.
That's right. Well, yeah, but you know, Shandu's right. You got to have some sort of an action, something that's going to keep people engaged. And you know, it could just be you do a little survey. It could just be you do a little survey. You know, here are some options on some things that, you know, could be considered. I don't know. It depends on what issues are coming up with the city council. Let us know how you think about it. Fundraisers use those things all the time, but it's also a way of giving people an action item that makes them feel like they're participating and doing something, and gives you some information about where the community is. So just things to think about.
Any other questions? Well, again, Elisabeth, thank you so very much.
Happy to be here. I'm your liaison, so, you know, call if you need me.
And we know that you are going to be moving soon, but Zoom goes everywhere.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The email address, my personal email address will remain the same, and I'm not resigning from the board. I promised Joyce I would get us through program planning and next convention, so you know where to find me. Just it'll be in a different time zone.
And I know from having all these emails when I was 12 hours ahead in Thailand that it does work. So.
And it's only, you know, it's only 1 hour. It's just Easter. It's Easter daylight time. It's not.
Well, thank you so very much. We really appreciate this, and thank everybody for being here. And I'm going to stop recording this. And thanks for coming, everybody. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Right. Thank you. Y'all have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.